I'm Jim Hutchinson from the Fisherman magazine, and you're on the road. With me this week, it's Sandy Hook, the Jersey Shore, with my special guest, Mike Waine, with the American Sportfishing Association. Fort Hancock in Sandy Hook. It's May 19th, 2023, and I bring that up because on May 18th, we had striper quest here in the area, out of bars. We tagged 203 striped bass for gray fish tag research, all 203 getting the green streamer tag. And we also did a couple of mini pat devices. And I thought this was appropriate because a friend of mine's in town for the event. And I said, come on, let's take a ride to Sandy Hook. It's beautiful out here. We're sitting out front of the Sea Grant advisory offices at Fort Hancock, looking out over all of the barracks and the parade grounds, and I see one of the party boats drifting through, looking for fluke today. It's just an absolutely gorgeous day. And Mike Waine, this is interesting here because if you think about the history of this particular part of New Jersey, going back a couple of hundred years, it was a defensive port. You still have the old gunneries protecting the United States. And if you go back over 300 years ago, I could be looking out onto Raritan Bay right now and probably seeing British warships. Revolutionary area. You know, you had the loyalists, those that were loyal to the crown, and those that were patriots, and we fought as brothers and sisters. And we're only 2 weeks off of a big vote at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission on striped bass, and it seems like we're brother and sister fighting again, I think, a little bit. Mike, a quick intro. Mike Waine is Atlantic Policy Director for the American Sportfishing Association. If you read the June edition of the Fisherman magazine, Mike and I did a big article together on the May 2nd, 2023 vote on striped bass. But Mike, before you came to the Industry Trade Association, you've got some skin in the game from the science and statistical. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So before I joined the American Sportfishing Association almost 5 years ago, I previously worked for NOAA Fisheries in their headquarters office in the Sustainable Fisheries Division. And so in that role, I was looking at different data sets and doing analysis for NOAA, and prior to that, I was working for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is the regional management body that manages our migratory species of fish, and striped bass is probably the flagship perfect example of that. And in that role, I was fishery management plan coordinator. So we have management plans to manage these fisheries, helps us understand what we're supposed to do through time and be responsive to the science. And so my job was to collect that scientific information, help package it, deliver it to the managers, work with the stakeholders to get their input on what the different management solutions would be to respond to whatever that scientific advice was, and then ultimately implement those management changes by working with all the states to get that done. So it really set me up for where I am now, and I love kind of reconnecting with that network as an advocate for the recreational fishing industry in my role at ASA.
So ASMFC is a cooperative, it's a compact. All the states get together. There's 3 representatives from each state. And we all know that. It's been covered in the Fisherman magazine. But typically, when the ASMFC comes up with big management decisions based on adhering to a fishery management plan, there's advance warning, there's a lot of public comment, there's a lot of different meetings, and usually it takes several months for a new regulation to come into play. On May 2nd, of course, the ASMFC, and more specifically, it was the Striped Bass Management Board, made an emergency decision. So how do I explain? How did this happen without the public comment, without the process? What exactly took place there?
Yeah, so this, as I said, the fishery management plans are used to help the stakeholders and the managers understand what are the goals and objectives for managing this important fishery and how do we get there. And so it really lays out a stakeholder-driven process through that FMP. And the stakeholders provide a lot of input to help craft that. I mean, if you remember, we just went through a draft Amendment 7 process that you covered in a lot of your issues. And ultimately, that process was looking at the goals and objectives of the plan, saying what do we really value in this fishery. All of the stakeholders involved were part of that process, providing input on how best to manage this resource. And so when that emergency action motion came up, it caught people by surprise. I mean, there was discussions going on that the recent assessment looked at projections and saw that we were going to struggle to rebuild in the time frame that we needed to. And so ultimately they used a small provision that is rarely used in the fishery management plan called emergency action, because they felt as though if we do not start responding to some of the issues that we're seeing, we will likely not hit our 2029 rebuilding period. But, this was a really tough situation, Hutch, because they wanted to be responsive to changing conditions in the fishery. 2022 was banner for the entire striper coast, but they ultimately didn't have the time they felt to really engage the stakeholders through this process. And so now we're dealing with those consequences, and they're ugly in some scenarios. And that's, that's something that the managers have to take very seriously, because we all participated in that FMP planning process with the expectation that the stuff that was in there was going to be followed. And in a way we are, by holding ourselves to the rebuilding period. But there really needs to be an opportunity for the public to comment on something so significant as this. And hopefully over the next several weeks before that implemented change in early July, the stakeholders will get an opportunity to be heard on this, because they certainly didn't get that opportunity during the meeting.
At this point, though, public comment isn't going to change. It's not going to change the decision. It wasn't. I had some questions from folks who said, they said that other states, did South Carolina and Florida participate? I said, no, it wasn't the full ASMFC. It's the management board. And based on that striped bass management board, and it's the board is inclusive of people in the striped bass range.
Exactly. From Maine to North Carolina is the current management unit for striped bass. And so all those states participate on the striped bass management board and make these decisions. And then, like you're referencing, the broader ASMFC is all the states from Florida to Maine. So the management unit for striped bass is just along the range in which we see the striped bass fishery occurring.
And to react to an incredible situation, for example, it doesn't look like, based on the outstanding striper bite we had on the coast in 2022, because the MRIP numbers, Marine Recreational Information Program, showed that we had a banner season. Because of that banner season, we have more removals. Because we have more removals, that means we have less of a 50% chance then of reaching the rebuild target by 2029. So that is why we have to have this emergency. We've never really had this in striped bass. We're used to it in fluke, summer flounder, black sea bass. Every year for a while the regulations change, but we never saw that with striped bass until more recently. Explain to me states going down to a lower upper slot. We went from, here in New Jersey, less than 38 inches. Most of everybody else was 35 inches. Why 31 inches?
Yeah, so Massachusetts was the state that brought the emergency action to the striped bass management board. And admittedly, Massachusetts has a scientific advantage, because Gary Nelson, who is the lead stock assessment scientist, works for the state of Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. And then Mike Armstrong, who leads the scientific arm of their division, he sits on the management board for the state of Massachusetts. So the scientific expertise between Mike Armstrong and Gary Nelson really represents the best understanding of the resource. So those guys went back and forth, ran projections, and said, what's coming for this longer term? And they saw that the strong 2015 year class, which is the year class that is one of the strongest left in the near term we've had a lot of poor recruitment coming out of the Chesapeake Bay. So when Mike and Gary looked at the data, they said, hey, if we need to reduce removals, how could we do that quickly? What regulations would we put in place to accomplish that? And what would those regulations do to not only reduce overall mortality, but reduce it specifically on that strong 2015 year class? And that 2015 year class, so when I say year class, I'm talking about baby striped bass born in 2015. And so that strong year class is now centered around 31 inches in size. And so
so by dropping, so the 2015 nursery was good. Chesapeake had a good, across the board, we had a good year for recruitment of baby fish in 2015. So 2015 year class is right there around that 31, 32 inch size, on average. Mm-hmm. So the thought is we've got to protect them, move them to the protected overslot. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So let them escape harvest. And so that dropping that maximum size down to 31 inches is so that the fish over that 31 inches will be released. And that does come at a conservation savings. But it will also obviously increase the number of fish that are handled and released. And that's something that I think the management board needs to take a look at once they are able to really look at, okay, what kind of impacts will this measure have? And they can do those evaluations, even though they didn't do that publicly before the emergency action. They can do that now and try to help answer some of these questions. What will that do to the ratio of harvest versus dead discards? Because, as you drop that maximum size, there's going to be less fish harvested. That's the intent of that regulation. But what does that do to the number of releases? How does it increase the number of releases? We've got this 9% release mortality rate that's used to calculate those numbers. And so it will be interesting to see moving forward, Hutch, what is the breakdown in the overall overarching mortality between harvest and dead discards, and how will that ratio change given the emergency action to reduce harvest of that mortality equation?
I think you bring up a good point, because that's maybe it alludes back to the infighting, the striped bass revolution, right? Sometimes I think we have a couple of different sides, and there are a lot of folks who enjoy striper fishing. They will never keep a striped bass, just the catch and release set. And then you have some folks, and I see them all the time. It's not the extreme where they want to kill everything, but there's some folks who want to just go up with their kids, take a striped bass home for dinner, and usually when they get their limit, they go. They're not continuing to catch and release striped bass. But when we look at the decision here, or the management whole paradigm, it's all about total removals, right? But when you talk about the total removals in the recreational community, it involves two elements of harvest. Of dead fish.
Of removals, yeah, exactly. So it's dead discards, which is, again, that 9%. So if you catch a fish and release it, it's an assumed 9% mortality rate from that interaction. We know it's higher in some areas. We know it's lower in some areas. But that's overall the best estimate that we have. And some recent science out of Massachusetts is confirming that amount. But, yeah, the other side of, so it's harvest, the removals is harvest and dead discards. And so it's all about controlling removals. And right now the managers have tools to control the harvest portion of that equation. There are not good tools to control the dead discards portion. Things like circle hooks in the fishery, not using gaffs, things like that. In theory, those should help fish survivability when they're released, but they're extremely difficult to quantify. And remember, we're looking for quantifiable reductions in total removals. And right now that is being specifically achieved through reductions in harvest. But
it's naturally going to increase. Where our discard rate should theoretically increase too, because if we've taken a 31, 32-inch fish, the 8-year-old fish, out of the harvest equation, it's still a good year class, so we're still going to have a lot more catch and release. So the mortality, I'm assuming that the ASMFC and their technical folks have some more of that information that will be made available at some point.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly how this regulation is going to work, the new smaller maximum size limit. And they will try to evaluate that through the next stock assessment, which will be upcoming later in 2024. 2024. And so ultimately what they'll do is they'll try to see, with this mid-year management change, was there any signal that we could pick up in that assessment? But remember, fisheries science is not perfect, and it's going to be challenging to take what we call the terminal year of the assessment and rely on the data and the analysis picking up on that mid-year management change. So what I mean when I say that is, typically the last year of a stock assessment is the most uncertain, and so that uncertainty is something that the managers need to consider when they evaluate, okay, was this measure effective? Did it have the intended effects? And that's where I think they can start to really look at, what happened to harvest from this regulation, and they can look and say, do we still see that 2015 year class showing up in the harvest, and or where is it in terms of releases? And so they really, my point is, they've got the ability to try to drill down into some of this. This is their area of expertise. They're going to work on doing that. There are limitations of the data for them to do that perfectly, but they will use what they have, and hopefully that will lead to some better understanding about the dynamics between harvest and dead discards as it relates to the new emergency action lower slot.
The interesting thing for me, that's one big component that, obviously I know the states want. Here in New Jersey, the New Jersey Marine Fisheries Council met the week after the decision, and they didn't want to take an immediate vote. I know it's turned a lot of people off out of state. They're like, why didn't New Jersey react? Well, because New Jersey wanted to get some more information. They wanted to get some more public input. The specific comment at one of the council meetings was one of the council members, Pat Donnelly, said, I don't want to do things the way the ASMFC did it. I want to get public comment. I want to go through the stakeholders here in New Jersey, get the Striped Bass Advisory Committee in New Jersey convened before we make a decision. And then hopefully, they were hoping to get some more information from ASMFC as well. That said, one thing that I find, and see if you can follow me on this one, we have talked about it, and we talked about it at length for the article in the June edition of the Fisherman magazine. In the past, managers have made decisions to do something about a particular year class, protect a particular year class. So I understand the actions about protecting the 2015 year class, but on the opposite side, we now have a harvest that is directed towards the 16 and 17 year class, which are lower, not as good, right? But that 3-inch slot that we're looking at, 28, 29, 30 to 31, right? What ramifications are there in directing all the recreational harvest on a single year class or 2 year classes? Do you think that becomes a concern?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a great question. And the reason it's a great question is because it clearly demonstrates the reason that there's a public process on this. It's to give stakeholders the opportunity to ask these types of questions. What is the impact of doing this emergency action to bring the slot down to 31 inches? What will that do to the other poorer year classes that harvest is going to target? And so these are the types of questions that the stakeholders are able to ask through a public process when that typical normal public process exists, which it did not in this scenario.
That's why I think people have a lot of questions and no answers, and that's what's I think a lot of people that I've talked to find frustrating.
Yeah, and these are the consequences of taking emergency action, and the board needs to take these concerns seriously. And the stakeholders are used to a public process on this, and so as an industry advocate, I specifically attend these meetings to be able to comment on these types of actions. And so I see firsthand the value of providing that input and being able to ask questions before making such a consequential decision. Now, granted, they were clearly prioritizing the rebuilding, they were clearly prioritizing the resource, but can't we do that also have a public process? The ASMFC is literally structured saying that we can do that. And so I really feel like there's opportunity for folks to be able to ask these questions, and that's the public process. And that's something that should be able to occur now that we have some time to look at this. But it's very clear that the board has indicated we want to move in this conservative direction, but that still leaves a lot of questions unanswered, Jim. And that's frustrating. I understand that that's frustrating.
Where do we go next? We're at a 3-inch size limit on striped bass right now. We're trying to rebuild to a target number of 2029. What of the 2023 year class, or what of the 2024 year class also is dismal, especially with the Chesapeake it seems like the Chesapeake is not producing the way it used to. What happens next if this 3-inch size limit doesn't result in increased recruitment?
Yeah, so
and maybe it's theoretical, I don't know, but where would we go next?
Yeah, the problem is, as you know, we can't control recruitment. So this is really about, meaning we can't control how many that year class strength, how many baby striped bass are born annually and survive. And there's no stock recruitment relationship here, meaning just because you have a ton of adult spawning females does not mean you're going to get a ton of baby striped bass from that. It's just very environmentally driven. And so
water temperature, rain.
Yep. And the striper fishery really knows what conditions typically produce good spawning success and recruitment, but we just haven't had them. And so, that's what Massachusetts saw when they were running those projections in-house. They said, look, we've got a lot of poor recruitment coming. And so we unfortunately don't have the luxury of waiting. But what does that look like moving forward? What will the regulations do to adjust fishing mortality? And remember, the intent is to reduce harvest, the amount of fish that are removed from the water. Like you said, anglers have a preference to take it home to feed their families. That all falls into the harvest category. And so the question moving forward is, if there aren't good tools to manage the dead discards, remember the circle hooks and stuff, we talk about it all the time. There's a heck of a surf casting community here at Sandy Hook, and when we're up here fishing together, we talk about it all the time, taking the barbs down. We're doing a lot where folks are switching from either taking the actual barbs down on their trebles or swapping out the trebles for singles. We've been talking about BKK Lone Diablo hooks because we're trying to do all that. The community is really trying to do a lot more. We talk about it in the Fisherman all the time, trying to reduce the amount of air exposure you get. I tell people all the time this fishery, you saw it yesterday. This fishery up here, we're getting some jumbos. And I tell people all the time, those jumbo fish, please keep your hands out of the gills, put it on the lips, brace that belly, hold that up. We need to take care of fish. But where does it all go? I think a lot of folks say, are we doing anything is all this effort that we're doing, is it going to reduce that mortality rate, that perceived mortality from 9 to 7 or 6? Yeah, it's really hard to measure that. I'm going to just be completely frank. I mean, theoretically, we are implementing, the conservation ethic, like you said, pinching barbs, that sort of thing, because we know that in theory helps survivability of striped bass. But it's very hard to measure and quantify that conservation savings. And I think the one part that has me worried is, right now the managers are focused on addressing the harvest, and that's because those are the tools that they have best to reduce the removals. But at some point,
well, we had a conversation last year where the commission was dealing with the possibility of 2-week closures in each particular state. At the height of your striper fishery, you have to shut down all targeting of striped bass. I mean, theoretically, is that what we're looking at next?
I mean, that's what scares me, is that given the dynamics in the resource right now, with the poor year classes longer term coming into the fishery, it's going to be really hard to rebuild back to this high target level. And we have in our fishery management plan, like I said, which was a stakeholder driven process, we have established that as the current goal. And so the dynamics at play here are going to continue to create management challenges for us to achieve that rebuilding target. And so the question becomes, at some point, do the managers consider more action to control the dead discard portion of the mortality? And I think you've seen some of the things that they considered, like you said, no targeting closures during the heat of the fishery. Like, that will be very hard for the industry, because you're basically telling anglers to get off the water, and that is not something that we want to be supporting, of course, especially if we are able to avoid it. And so I think there's going to be a situation in which the managers are going to sit down and say, okay, if we want to rebuild to this really high level, and we've taken a very concerted effort to control the harvest side of this equation, is there more opportunity to control the dead discards? What does that look like? And how would it be accomplished? And I think that's the part that has me worried. There's not great tools. I've been encouraging our industry to work on thinking creatively about what it looks like to better manage the dead discards, because if we don't do something, we will rely only on the harvest side of that equation to achieve our conservation goals. And I'm not sure we can get there. I mean, as an association, we'll be advocating as an industry association that represents our entire community, all of our anglers, whether you're an angler that prefers to take a fish home to feed your family, or whether you're an angler that prefers to catch and release all of your stripers, or whether you're in between,
right,
or whether you're in between. That's the entire spectrum right there. That is our industry. That is who we represent, and our tackle manufacturers produce equipment for those individuals. And so we are going to say we think there's opportunity to manage this resource for all of our community, and therefore, what does that look like if we want to have a level of harvest that's sustainable over time? How do we address total removals in the dead discards to get there? And that is where all the question marks are right now, Jim.
I equate this all the time to the debates in this country, Republican versus Democrat. People are shouting over each other. And I think that you're in a unique position, or an unenviable position, of trying to bring everybody to the table. And we've got to bring the left, we've got to bring the right, we've got to bring the center. And we've got to get all these people together to figure out exactly what we want out of the striped bass fishery.
And that's the fishery management plan. That's the goals and objectives. That's my point. It's like that's where all of that lives. And so these conversations are going to continue to happen. And look at where we are. Look, New Jersey was the one dissenting vote on emergency action, and here I am, listening to the New Jersey constituents, trying to figure out from you guys, what can we do to address some of these challenges, Hutch? And the process could have been way better on this. And we're trying to figure out, come together, put our heads together. What are the solutions? That's the way we operate as an industry association. We go straight into it head on. How do we address these challenges? How can our industry come together and address the challenges? That's why you see a lot of these tackle manufacturers switching from trebles to single hooks. Voluntarily, they understand the need for trying to address the release mortality aspect of this, and it's gonna be an interesting future for striped bass because these challenges are here to stay.
Mike, I'm going to throw a term at you. It's a word. It's an acronym. It's BOFs, big old fat fekin female fish. Looking out here on the Raritan Bay, we have this incredible bite that starts in March, April, jumbo fish, sagging bellies, heading up the Hudson River to spawn. We've really, I think, as a community, have done the best we possibly can to promote safe, healthy catch and release. And a lot of the reason for that is because of these big old fat fekin female fish. You've seen it firsthand. You saw it at Striper Quest yesterday. I think on our boat. So I mentioned this at the beginning. We tagged 203 striped bass on May 18th, 2023. Mike fished with me aboard Dave Glassberg's Critter Catcher. And we tagged 17 fish. Not one of them was under 40 inches. We also deployed a Wildlife Computers mini-pat device in one of those fish that will gather light, temperature, depth data inside this tag for the next 5 months. You can get more information on the Northeast Striped Bass Study at thefisherman.com. Another boat, Chuck Manny aboard his Timon, they also deployed a mini-pat device and a 42-inch striped bass, but they had 4 50-pound stripers. One particular guy had 3 50s himself. My boss, Mike Caruso, had a 50-pounder, which I'm never going to hear the end of. You joined us for an incredible bite back in November here at the Jersey Shore, and then you experienced what you did on Thursday. What's your take about this particular fishery in the New York bite, New Jersey Shore, and the surrounding areas?
Yeah, no, it's an incredible fishery here. And, when I was here in November, Hutch, you remember, I couldn't wait to get back. So I'm happy to be back here and got the opportunity to fish with a bunch of industry members yesterday. And, this is really about, like we said, finding solutions through these management challenges, and the charter boats that participated yesterday, listening to those captains, hear what they have to say about the fishery here in New Jersey. The access to the resource is incredible. We're out here on Sandy Hook. There's shore access, there's boating access, there's headboat access. So we were just really trying to put our heads together with the community, use this grayfish research tagging effort as a way to pull us all together. And remember, the charter boats are selling to our entire community as well. And there are anglers that prefer to take a fish home, and they do that by taking a charter to do it. And so if harvest continues to get constrained, what are those charters going to do? How will they sell trips? And so as an association, we're trying to think about that. How do we help our industry through these challenges? And so, it was great to see, Chris Bishop from Yozuri yesterday, and Justin Poe from Penn, and Chris from American Fishing Wire.
Fishing Wire. Well, we had Mike Shields from AFW and his crew, and we had Jerry from Seagar. We had people from all over. And we have some great support here from the community for this event with Gray Fish Tag Research, Captain Wags on Fin Chasers. I mentioned Dave Glassberg and Chuck Manny, but we had other charter boats participating in this event. Frank from the other Frank Crescitelli. I had some time to talk, and you did as well yesterday, because you just mentioned it is very important to me. Fletcher Chase, Captain Fletcher, runs Two River Charters here out of the Highlands, and he participated yesterday. But we had a conversation at the captain's meeting on Wednesday night, and Fletcher really kind of summarized it pretty well for me. Fletcher has some clients who come and, they're kind of business folks who come in and they don't necessarily want to bring a couple of fish home. They just want to have some fun catch and release, and Fletcher does a great job with the healthy release of those fish. But he does have a customer base. A lot of folks come in from Pennsylvania who can only go fishing 2, 3, 4 times a year. Not like, I live at the Jersey Shore. I'm fishing as much as I can. But 3 or 4 times a year, somebody comes in from Pennsylvania. They do want to take a couple of fish home. And they're not doing a major, they're not enjoying a catch and release fishery every single day. They're coming into town. They want to enjoy the fishery. They want to enjoy the environment, but they do want to take a couple of fish home. So
yeah, it was good to get an opportunity to talk directly with the captains. And again, the questions I was asking them is, how has this fishery been for you? How many trips do you sell in a season? How do you think you could market a fish tagging trip in lieu of fish harvest, for example? Well, or a combination where
that's it. That's the combination, because I think the one thing, when we went to the slot fish in 2020, right? I think that's the year it was. And a lot of folks said, oh, the New Jersey charter boat fleet, they're going to go bankrupt because they kill all the fish. But Gray Fish Tag Research that's when we started working with them in 2019. And it's an industry model. They want to get these green streamer tags over to our industry, our for hire folks in New Jersey. So what was happening, what we found immediately is like a guy like Fletcher, he goes out and he puts a Pennsylvania father and son into a 40-pound striper, and instead of killing that fish, and I'm not picking on Pennsylvania, my friends in Pennsylvania, but I'm just saying people who come from out of the area, and instead of killing that 40, Fletcher said, no, wait a minute, I'm going to connect your son to that fish forever, and we're going to put this Gray Fish Tag Research streamer tag in that fish. Son names it after his mom. They watch that fish kick strong. And then when that return comes, that son is going to be connected to that fish forever. And I think that was a really key component of getting through that.
And that's a powerful message. And that's one that the industry clearly showed up to support yesterday. And it's going to take us working together. And so it's important to be having these conversations directly with the folks that will be impacted the most. And that's why I'm here. Frankly, that is why I'm here. And it's great to be able to connect with our industry to do that, because we have to work together to get to where we want to get to. And so, it's great to hear directly from the charter boat captains. I was really impressed with how conservation minded they were, and they understand the dynamics better than most. I think one of the things that that trips me up sometimes is I'm like listening to these individuals and I'm saying, wow, these perspectives, they need to be heard more. And so, I view that as part of my role. Can I come to these important areas of our fishery as an industry policy advocate, understand your fishery better, understand the challenges that your charter boats are going through, and find ways to help address those, to keep them profitable and keep them fishing and keep them on the water with the rest of us. So, this is not just about the charter boats, of course. This is all anglers. The idea that we have the opportunity to give back to the resource, participate in these tagging efforts to really recognize the value of letting that fish go having that personal connection and getting that return, that whole cycle, which you've heard me tell that story before. Like that's literally why I'm sitting here today, is because I caught that tag stripe bass when I was in high school, and here we are so many, I won't tell you how many years later, talking about the same thing. And look, that's really what this is about, is like that connection, that connectivity, that story that everybody has on striped bass starts somewhere. And we're trying to create those stories through these tagging efforts. And that's really important given the state of the resource right now and the state of the fishery with that resource. Because we've got widespread fish availability right now, Hutch. We've got people being able to access the resource. That's what we want to see, that successful management. If we rebuild the species and see that abundance grow, that is the management we're looking for. And so why try to just come in and stifle it? No, come in, talk through with the people, find out how can we all work together to get past this, because there is such a broad spectrum of anglers out there, and we have to involve everybody in the solution.
I think that really kind of it's a great way of summarizing our discussion today, because we said it before, we've got to bring everybody together, and I think you're doing a fantastic job in that, in kind of marshaling all the different comments coming through, helping with the ASMFC. It's great for the ASA to get involved in this stuff, but I think that you mentioned it before, and I hear this a lot. There's some folks who sometimes yell and scream at all those charter boat captains. Oh, they just want to do this, or the party boat captain. I was like, would you forget about who's at the helm and think about the customers? Because they're individual anglers. And I always saw the head boats who carry multiple passengers. It's just a bus. They're a mass transit. You're at home, you're able to walk, to work, you're able to walk to the fishery. You have your own car, you have your own boat. But for a lot of folks in inner cities, in other areas, the head boat is the only way. It's that bus to get out there to the grounds. And if you graduate from the bus, you then start taking an Uber or a taxi, and then you're on a charter boat. But it's not the captains. The captains are serving a customer base, and the customer base is feeding this stuff up, and I hear it. A lot of times that I hear it, and that's why I like to hear what you're saying, because I think the major thing is we've all got to start coming together and having a more rational discussion about what we expect out of the fishery and what we expect for the future. You heard the background before where Mike and I are speaking outside of Sea Grant. There are a lot of kids programs. You could hear kids talking, chattering and laughing. It's a Friday. Special events, kids field trip to come to the NOAA lab around the corner, or come to Sea Grant. That's what we're doing for the fishery in the future, but we can't forget about those kids fishing today too. And I know a lot of young anglers right now who are also trying to get their hands around this, or get their heads around this, because we often talk about the future of the fishing community, yet I've got young anglers right now who fish all the time and they don't get what's going on.
Yeah. And that's why I love that you guys are doing these podcast interviews to try to help break this down and help our community better understand where we're headed, what challenges exist between where we are now and where we're going, and how do we come together on those challenges. And that's where ASA loves to be. I mean, that's what I feel like that's the value we provide to our industry, is working directly with the managers to help shepherd the voice of our community in the policy process. And that's why it's so important that we really protect that public process, because it gives the opportunity to work through those solutions together, instead of it just being jammed down people's throats. And so that's where we plan to go with this. And the grayfish tagging event is getting bigger every year, and that's what we want. That's how this is going to spread across the community here. And the more participants in that process, the more people realize that there's opportunity here that is untapped, and we need to continue to grow that. And so that's a really good opportunity for everyone involved yesterday, and I'm really appreciative to be a part of that.
Well, you'll be back here again in May of 2024 when we do it again, and hopefully you'll come back in the fall when we have our run. And folks, you can find out more about striped bass. Mike was fantastic to help with the article that you'll find at the Fisherman magazine about the ASMFC decision, but I'm going to let you go because you got to fly back down south, and we'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Of course, Jim. Thanks for having me on. Great time to be here and talk through all this.